Tēnā koutou katoa, kanui te mea kia koutou tēnā koutou. Kia ora whānau. Today I've got the great privilege of interviewing Helmut Modlik. Helmut is the tumu whakarei or CEO of Te Runanga or Toa Rangatira. This organisation is one of our major iwi or tribes here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. They are in a significant part of New Zealand, and their particular rohi is in and about Wellington. Importantly, Helmut is here to talk with me today about a few things around misinformation, disinformation, also around community engagement, and about civil society and how we move forward. I'm very excited to have him. He holds huge mana within Aotearoa, and which means he is highly esteemed in the English. I just want to sort of meet him at this stage, and over the next sort of 45, 50 minutes, we'll be hearing some of his reflections on the topic that we're going to talk about today. So with that, whānau, I hope you enjoy it. Have a great day wherever you may be with that tākite. Kia ora whānau, I'm here today with one of our rangatira, one of our ariki, one of our chiefs from Ngāti Toa, Helmut Modlik, and I just wanted to mihi to you at this stage and say we're really grateful that you could spend some time with us today to have this korero. And so without further ado, as I've just discussed in the introduction, this is a great honour to have him here today. So with that, we're going to get right into it, Ihoa. And the first thing I'd like to talk to you about is, and we've had this discussion before about misinformation and disinformation, particularly around our people. And when I say our people, I'm reflecting Māori. I'm also reflecting a little bit of Pacifica, and to a certain extent, ethnic communities, which are very collective by nature. So I guess the first thing I wanted to ask you, Helmut, is that when we think about misinformation and disinformation, how it impacts Māori, what is a key thing that stands out to you from your perspective? What happens when we misinform or disinformation one Māori? What's the ripple effect, or how do you perceive it?
Yeah, look, kia ora, Gareth, and kia ora, everyone. So look, if I could answer that question by stepping back from the question itself and just sharing my perspective on what is going on for us generally as human beings when we're interacting with one another and trying to negotiate reality with one another. I was a attendee at a conference a number of years ago, and the keynote speaker was a chap who I think at the stage he would have been 40, and as a 18-year-old he'd been arrested, charged, and convicted of murder. He, as a young man, he'd been involved with a drug deal. The dealer had tried to come on to him sexually. The young fella had cracked the guy who was selling to him, and he'd fallen over, cracked his head, and died. And so this boy had gone to prison. And anyway, he was sharing his story with us all. And he, at the point of him speaking to us, he is actually a PhD qualified now, a successful career, and was sharing with us his crossroads moment. And it was a guy in the prison had befriended him and had come to him one day, and just as a fun exercise, he'd said to him, Paul was his name, Paul, I've got a book here and a scrunched up piece of paper. If I drop them both, he was just having fun with the boy. If I drop them both, which one is going to hit the ground first? And Paul said that he knew, nothing doubting, that the book would hit the ground first because it was heavier. It's just logical, right? So he said so. And he said when his friend let them go and they both hit the ground at the same time, he said, I couldn't have been more shocked if my friend had sprouted wings and flown away. He said that the thing is that I was certain, like with every fiber of my being, that the way I thought about those things was right. And I was so shocked that I was wrong. I couldn't rest until I reevaluated everything else in my life that I was certain was right, and to reevaluate, in fact, whether or not I was also mistaken. And that was this crossroad moment that subsequently led him off to fundamentally different life. Now, I make that observation because the truth of the matter is that both Paul and all of us think that we see the world as it is. We all think that. The truth of the matter is that, a little or a lot. The truth of the matter is, though, that in fact, we all see the world as we are. And that is, there is no other way to experience the world, to experience the universe. And the reason is that the universe can't speak for itself. We have to perceive it with our senses and with our intellect, right? And the mental models that we create for ourselves through our upbringing, like so when we're born into, sorry to get all psychological, but I have to give this background so that my observations make sense. So of course we're born with an operating system that enables our heart to beat and breathe, not digest, not much more, cry when we're hungry, not much more. And then progressively through our formative years, we're bombarded with the data that comes to us through our senses, from the universe, from the world, from people, and we progressively write the mental models, the programs in our mind that enable us to walk, to talk, to interact with one another in meaningful ways. And so we create a library of these mental models or these programs that are formed up for us. And particularly during our core socialization years, those models are the most fundamental for us and the most difficult to change, right? We're largely even oblivious to the parameters of those models, like Paul, who was certain about the parameters that his mental model led him to evaluate the world. Now, as we have those things in our head, and then we interact with each other and with the world through our various senses, we quite literally are negotiating reality with ourselves and with the people we meet. We're never sure. There is no way I can know whether or not you're thinking that what I'm saying is the same that I'm thinking. There's no way of knowing that. And even for myself, as I'm interacting with you, we literally negotiate reality with ourselves every day and with each other every day. Now, coming back to your question. So somebody comes along and says something to me. I have no idea what their mental model is. I have no idea how they were raised. I have no idea what they think the word vaccine means to them mentally, emotionally. I have no idea. I have no idea about anything. But this is life. And so we're used to living within the uncertainty of that negotiated experience and reality. So coming back to your question, for us as Indigenous people, whose story is one of egregious breaches of solemnly entered into covenants for Tauiwi or Pākehā or European people being in our land, formally representative of the Queen of England, uniform, pomp and ceremony, signed by our chiefs, signed by them, and then we go forward and within 5 minutes, they're stealing land, they're going back on their promises, they're killing our people. And then they utilize their constitutional system to implement laws that marginalize and further dispossess us, to bring about law and order, which further just marginalizes and impoverishes and so forth. And so we got 150 years of that nonsense. Oh, and then they come forward and say, oh, look, there's a big existential threat here. Trust us. Do X, Y, and Z. Come on. So there's at least two categories of disconnect there, right? One is the the degree to which there is a shared perception on our lived experience, how we're experiencing the world, and what they think we're thinking and saying when they say any damn thing to us, to be blunt. And then there is a underlying context of intergenerational dishonesty and saying one thing and doing the other. These are all in the mix. Now, let me just say one thing lastly, and then I'll pause for a bit. This is not unique to Aotearoa New Zealand. I was standing recently on the Acropolis, staring across at the hill that democracy was invented on by Greek philosophers, 3,000 years ago. And I was reminded that, particularly in the West, we think of democracy like it's a natural system, or something given to us from by God almost, No, we made it up. We made it up. And the version that most of us are organizing our societies under came to us in the 18th and 19th century. And they were designed, version 1, mostly to provide checks and balances on the unbridled use of power by emperors and kings and dictators, right? So, we want to leave that behind. We know what that looks like. That's rubbish. So now we're into democracy. But what they weren't designed to do, it didn't even come into the minds of the framers, certainly not outside of the American Republic. They've got a bit more going for them in their formative thinking. But for the rest of us, they definitely weren't designed in order to deliver systematically ubiquitous well-being, right? They weren't designed for that. And the reason we know that they weren't designed for that is because you can't think of a single public policy outcome, not one, that is universally available to all citizens of this land. Healthy food? No. Education? No. Housing? No. Roads and footpaths? No. Nothing. Right? And if something is that reliably non-universal, you can write it down that it was systematic. It's systematic. My point is, the world over, more or less, our civil societies, our pluralistic democracies are under pressure, right? The world over. And increasingly people are being reminded that civil society, democracy, it's a fiction that actually only works when everybody believes it, right? It relies on the consent of the governed to work. It's like money. Money is a fiction as well. It only works if everybody buys into it. People stop believing, you get a run on the bank. People stop believing in the legitimacy of our civil society and our democratic institutions. They stop believing that in sufficient numbers. You get civil unrest. You get what we saw in our parliament last year. That's what you get. And so that's a very long-winded answer to your question, but I've laid the groundwork of the framing about how I think about information, perception, civil order. It's all connected in my mind. Kia ora.
Oh, ka pai ihoa. No, that was brilliant. In fact, it connects strongly with this next very direct question I've got for you. You are Ngāti Toa. You are from the capital, if I can put it that way. For Pākehā, it's the Wellington capital, and we had these Wellington protests, and I want to use English terminology for it because they were in Wellington, they were at Parliament, and this is an area which is key, obviously, to all of Aotearoa, but particularly also to your particular tribal group, your iwi. And what we had this phenomena where we had Māori that were protesting, and they were against this concept of people being forced to take vaccines or having to take vaccines, or anti-mandating, meaning why are we mandated to do this? And having gone to the protest as an observer in the very beginning, at the very end, I saw this phenomena that I want to talk to you about. I saw ideologies which were so different from each other, left to right, where you might have the far right white in terms of their own ideology, and we had Māori on the other side, which is equity for Māori and or people of that particular colour, if I can put it that way. But towards the end, I saw this incredible phenomena where the rights began to merge with our people, and it was quite frightening because you know this was the very groups of people that would talk against us and were against us from an ideological perspective. But there's that enemy of mine enemy comes together, and I wanted to ask you about this. But you know, how did you perceive that whole thing? You were there. Um, I believe there were comments that were made also, and it's a very broad question, Ihoa, but it's designed to let you just free flow. Just jump on that walker in the back and just go for it. Yeah.
Kia ora. Kia ora. So look, in one sense, what we saw there in Parliament, in one sense, was not really about the vaccines at all. If when I was a kid, my cousin and I, like lots of little boys do, were playing with matches in the field behind my auntie's house. Up it went. So we're standing on the road while the fire truck comes, everyone's out there. Oh, how did that start? Saying nothing. What was of course, the match that we were playing with lit the fire, but the conflagration, the big was because the grass was dry. There was wind. The circumstances were right for it to get out of hand and be. That's what I saw in town. Right. Yep. The match was undoubtedly the feeling, the strength of feeling amongst most of just disagreeing with the imposition on their personal mana, their personal dignity in terms of the vaccines and everything to do with COVID, the lockdowns and all of that. Yeah, but I would characterize the breadth and depth of what manifested as being more reflective of the stuff I was alluding to, the fact that we're at a stage in the relative ill health of our civil society where the match of the COVID kaupapa was enough to light the fire, both metaphorically and literally, that we saw in town. Just a couple of other reflections about that. It was interesting to see the extraordinary diversity of faces and ages and socioeconomic apparent backgrounds, as you say, with a different topic. Many of those people would have been on opposite sides of the debate, but here they were passionately together because they'd had enough. They'd had enough. A reflection about the nature of a civil society, anything that's worthy of that name, is that on occasion citizens, for various reasons, decide not to play by the rules of that society, and so we all agree, either actually or implicitly, that there needs to be those whose job it is to restore order, and what that means is we agree to give coercive power. So these men and women in blue who come around periodically to restore order, that's because the social contract that we've got in our civil society is we prefer to live under a system of order with these rules, and on occasion we accept that coercive power is in the hands of these these young men and women mostly, and that means they have the right, the legal right, to take our freedom, take our property, and on occasion even to take our lives. That's what happens sometimes within the law. Now think about that. Coercive power to that degree. Well, that's what it means to live in a civil society, a rules-based society. Now, but there's a quid pro quo. We only surrender that right for coercion to those young men and women and those who organize it, because we're satisfied that what's available to us to mitigate the inappropriate use of that power, the courts, the ethics and values that characterizes our peoples, right, amongst others, that those mitigate that unfettered use, and that more generally we get benefits of living in this orderly system. Now, when you feel like that deal ain't working for you anymore, right? The benefit flow, that the checks and balances for unfettered and inappropriate use is not delivering that side of the deal, or you throw out the other side and you just tell them to get lost. I'm like, you do what you want to do, and you pick up the rock and you light the fire. Well, that's what happened, bro. And so that's why I would frame and characterize what we saw there in a far more fundamentally different way. And it's not unique to us. The world over, and perhaps most seriously, the United States is staring at a 21st century reevaluation of the fitness for purpose of the parameters that our civil society are organized under and operating under, right? And January 6th last year, you couldn't have sold a script to Hollywood that there would be an invasion of US citizens into their Capitol building, because no one would have believed that that's a stupid idea, right? But bro, that happened. Here we just got fire lit and all the rest of it, but nobody died. But could have. You get the point I'm making.
Yeah.
Last observation I'd make about it. Psychologically, it's impossible to wield power in any degree without, on occasion, feeling its corrupting influence. Power is inherently and unavoidably corrupting on the human psyche. It's impossible. You're a dad, you couldn't love your children more, but you yourself know when you've been tired, when you haven't been on your game, and they've done things that have annoyed you, you've done and said things that you regret, right? Same with the police, same with politics, power is inherently and unavoidably corrupting. And so we put in place formal mechanisms for mitigating that corrupting influence, but there's a whole bunch of other stuff. So when these boys and girls in blue turn up in our community and they don't know us, and they don't know our life experience, and they don't know our worldview and the mental models, right? And they don't know any of that, and they come in and they say what they say, and they think we're thinking what they're thinking, and we aren't, and it turns to custard. Well, guess who loses that? We do. So I'm painting a picture that there is a multifactorial number of issues in play that give rise to differences of perception, what's actually going on, different definitions of the problem set and the dimensions of the problem, and certainly different ideas about how to appropriately respond. Last observation on the response side as an example, right? So if you'd have asked just about everybody in the country what to do in connection, excuse me, with the fact that there was this heated and escalating situation, bring in the police, get the army or whatever, shut the, whatever, coerce. So our relations in Wellington, Tiateawa and Taranaki Whānui, which Parliament is at right core in their tribal boundaries. What did they do? See, we come from a people of intergenerational conflict. We know what that looks like. We know how to pull out the patu and to take care of that. But particularly our Taranaki relations, these are the descendants of the prophets from Parihaka, who 100 years before Martin Luther King framed up the idea of fighting aggression and violence with peaceful protest and passive resistance. And so what did our Taranaki relations in town do? They brought out the raukura, the feather. They got the whānau out. They did the waiata and the karaki, and they reached out to all of the Māori people there, and they invited them to remember who they were and to embrace them and to extend their aroha, their manaaki, to support that. Took the oxygen out of it. Quite a different frame, right? Just to make the point, depending on what's in your head is the reality that you're perceiving and what the ideas that come to you about how to respond to what's in front of you. There's a lot in this korero, bro, a lot.
Wow, bro. So I was actually there when they did the waiata and they put those outstretched hands, and I must admit it was a poignant moment because it was actually beautiful. And I felt during that period of time that there was a de-escalation by everyone,
Yes.
not just them. It was any person that was there, and so I have to acknowledge that because when we think about this dynamic between us not trusting the Crown, so the Crown is telling us we should vaccinate, we should.
Sorry, bro. Can I just say a quick thing about that?
Yeah.
And then you finish your thought. Just the thing that came to my head. See, you can't beat negative emotion with more negative emotion. You can't beat emotion with rationality, right? If you've got negative energy, if you've got dark emotion, it's only positive emotion. You only beat darkness with light. These are incontrovertible psychological realities. As sentient beings, this is how human beings work. Our old people learned this. They were killing each other for thousands of years. So they learned how to deal with the heat of conflict and the various kinds. And so our old people developed these rituals and practices for how to deal with these difficult realities. And we ought to be wise enough to contemplate and use them appropriately. And thankfully, increasingly in this land at least, that appears to be increasingly the case. Last reflection, after it was all said and done, everyone went home, the land was cleared out front of Parliament, grass resown and all the rest of it. We were invited to come and be a party to in English, a ritual of healing and karaki or blessings on all of that to bring peace back to it and to a positivity and positive energy. And this was participated in with the ministers of the Crown, with the tangata whenua, local leaders all coming together. And I thought to myself, I couldn't help, I thought to myself, gee, my mum and my uncles and aunties would never have credited the day that, mana whenua of this land would have been called on to the grounds of Parliament in order to whakawātea te hara, to clear away the sins of what had gone on and to karakia hei hāpaitia to uplift the wairua of that place. But here we were in partnership with our government. Now, see, to me, this is the spirit of re-asking and answering the question, how can we live on this land together better, richer? Are there perspectives, a way of thinking about been on this land together that aren't, old and proven to not work, can we open our minds to new and richer ways? And I saw it that day.
Wow, I have to talk on what you just said, because that concept of emotion to emotion, negative emotion, you bring positive emotion, and that's what I actually witnessed, because I saw both Māori, and I also saw tears in the eyes of non-Māori when they were there, because it was very emotional, and so I think we've got to capture that, because I was at a sort of a uh, presentation today earlier on, talking to some of our intelligence practitioners, brilliant people, lovely people, and I was looking at the questions that they presented to me when I was going through the korero. People willing to make changes and wanting to make improvements, but there was an underlying theme that came out as I listened. New frameworks being developed, and this concept of community engagement, or thinking about civil society more. And so my question for you, because I've seen you in action, bro, as a civil society sort of leader, master, and the concept of bringing very diverse, different people together under this banner of, look, we're all in this together, we're all different, but as a civil organization or a entity, we've got to do better. So my question to you is that, when we think about Te Ao Māori, the concept of our worldview, and what you're describing to me is the Māori to the Māori, is our feeling someone and knowing someone without thinking about who they are, but you're feeling them. And this has been a beautiful thing that I've learned through being raised, is that quite often we feel people as opposed to thinking about them, and we know that we're in safe places. So thinking about that concept of Te Ao Māori, thinking about sort of going forward for community engagement, particularly to offset, misinformation, disinformation, not just for Māori, but for all. What can you share with us, bro? I mean, how do we capture this Māori and structure it in such a way that it permeates to sort of create this positive emotion with negative emotion, and overcomes the rationalization of who we are? What can you share with us, bro? What's the key to it? The magic recipe, bro.
Yeah, look, thanks for that. So, we start our journey as human beings with a natural focus on our physiological needs. We're hungry, we're cold, so forth. And then as we mature, we find ourselves less and less concerned with those, physiological hedonistic inclinations. Eventually, if we're wise enough, and we find, in fact, that they're not enough. I mean, when you're a young adult, all you know is your senses, and your teenager, you just, that's what, and some people never leave that behind very far. But, when you start to have kids, when you start to actually find that it's only through higher order considerations of living here sustainably and meaningfully with others that you find, in fact, that there are higher order things that bring joy, bring happiness to you, that give meaning to your life. Because of course that's the great question for all of us, is meaning. That's the great quest for all of us, is to live with meaning. And so as we're interacting with one another on this journey of finding meaning, one of the great paradoxes. Now, of course, a fellow who walked on water said it best, but others have said it in different words. And more recently, psychologists have discovered some interesting related thoughts and related facts. And it's around the idea that self-centeredness is connected with anxiety, depression, and living sadness. Like if you're entirely self-centered, that's a horrible way to live. But that, in fact, if you live your life outward looking at others, how can I help others? How can I manaki others? How can I uplift others? You know, that's the richest way to live. Now, I go there because that's generally not the frame, that's generally not the kaupapa or the philosophy that comes at us from our modern Western secular, you know, and I'll say it, atheistic world, you know, generally consume me, what I want. This is the thing. Now, that doesn't resonate with our people. And I'll be frank to say, ultimately, it doesn't resonate with anyone. And so what I have seen play out recently is when we want to engage in power, the right things to be happening on the ground amongst our communities, we've got to be bringing to bear the known principles of sources of personal power and effectiveness. I'll give you the king of them all. Well, it's one of them. And it's the idea I said before about not being self-centered, but being looking out. In our worldview, we have the value of manaakitanga. That's often translated as caring for others. But mana is a big concept, but let's call it the inherent dignity and self-worth and worth. And aki or aki is to encourage or to grow. So mana aki or manaki is when you act in a way that enhances the mana, the dignity, the worth of the person that you're serving or with. And this then brings in another principle of eternal effectiveness for human interactions, utu or reciprocity. By virtue of me starting in a selfless frame of serving and helping my people or anybody, immediately there is an inherent desire on the part of the person helped to act with reciprocity. In other words, to manaki me. This creates a virtuous cycle of goodness. Now, why have I gone there? Two reasons. One is that it's an example of the richness and of principles of human effectiveness that is found in our traditional worldview. We've got our own words, we've got our own concepts, but they're relatable. People can understand what we're talking about. So if I'm a non-Māori person operating in a position of authority and I'm thinking my tauiwi or my European thoughts and my cultural preferences and how people work, etc., and I'm not open to, in fact, reflecting on the wisdom and the efficacy of the kinds of worldviews and values that I'm talking about, I will miss the boat if I'm wanting to influence, inform, engage, and meaningfully be a part of our community. Second observation, and this was most forcefully reinforced during the attempt to get New Zealanders adequately vaccinated. So, speaking of machinery of government, right? The authorities, they did their thing. Everyone needs to get vaccinated. Publicity, out come the rules, mandates, la, la, la. If we don't get to above 95%, we won't get the population health benefits, la, la, la. What happened? 50%, 60%, no further. And nothing they could say or do could nudge that. Nothing. Top down, end of story. It wasn't until trusted voices, trusted faces, and trusted places who'd paid the price previously to be trusted were brought to bear that we saw the vaccine levels go up to where they needed to go. And so it was a proof in the pudding that, in fact, if you want, and this is not just for a health outcome, any outcome, any social outcome, you have got to have the centre do its top-down thing. It's good for some things, aggregating resource, coordinating communication, blah, blah. But if you truly want to get ubiquity or universality of social outcomes, the community's got to be involved. And for the community to be involved, it's got to be informed, engaged, empowered, and resourced, right? And it's not just anybody, trusted voices, trusted faces, and trusted places. And then and only then have you got top down, bottom up, and a reasonably good chance of ubiquitous delivery and outcomes. Now, that description of that dynamic of how we saved ourselves from the existential threat of COVID, that didn't happen because the clever boys in the city thought of it. That didn't happen for that reason. That happened because community leaders who still have intact social infrastructure in the Māori community, in the Pacifica community in particular, did what leaders do, saw the gap, mobilized, said to the centre, we'll take care of our people, we'll take care of our space. And they had the sufficient wisdom to agree, to engage, and away we went. So the reflections for me, bro, out of those the key reflections out of those stories I just told there was the principle of subsidiarity is the idea that you locate decision making and resource at the place closest to where the most proximate and timely information emerges, right? And currently, our civil society does not do that. It concentrates power, it concentrates resource, and it risk manages its deployment to prevent the embarrassment of the people in control. And what we were reminded of and given powerful lessons in is that the people closest to where the decisions and where the action needs to be can be trusted, can be informed, engaged, empowered, and resourced to work effectively with each other. And to my mind, that is the true miracle of the team of 5 million. That, not the original miracle of the team of 5 million, which was the Prime Minister saying, let's build Fortress New Zealand and lock it down. And yeah, okay, that was a good trick. Nobody else pulled that off. But what subsequently followed during the vaccine time, when we all willingly collaborated materially, not just sitting at home, but went and got the jabs, went out, helped every others to do what was needed to do to get up and get it going. This was the true example for me of the miracle. And there was enough in it for the go forward for us to discern what are key elements of change we need to make. Now, I don't know if that answers your question, bro, but those were my reflections that came to mind from what you said.
Oh, bro, I'm going to package that up and sort of sell it off the universities, man. That was brilliant. But I think sort of in wrapping this up, because, you know, the knowledge that you shared today, you know, you speak it easily. It obviously you live it. It's embedded in you. And yet, you know, we would think that trusted voices, I think you said trusted places, and what was the other one? 3 things.
Trusted voices, faces, and places.
Yeah. Faces and places, is that that all makes so much sense, doesn't it? So how do we
principles of human effectiveness, right?
Yeah,
you want to be trusted, be trustworthy.
Yep.
Imagine that.
So just to call it off and to channel it though, bro, which is what you said, is that we have that concept or that sort of really key power, but we still have communities out there which are disaffected, which are disconnected, which feel that they're not empowered. And I have to speak up on behalf of our people, on behalf of Māori, is that you know, how, you know, your organization is amazing, because I know what you do. I know what you do with not just with Māori, I know what you do with Pacifica and ethnic communities, in fact the whole community in your rohi. And I think you're very fortunate, because you've almost got a defined sort of like geographic area. You're very lucky.
Yeah, bro, very blessed. Yeah.
But you've got a lot of Māori which are urbanized, which are not connected to their rohi, which are not connected to their hapu or iwi. And in my perspective, that's the majority of our people. They've not got that sort of shelter or canopy So my thing to you, it's a bit of a challenge, eh, bro, is that how do we bring those principles to our disaffected communities? Because we still got the ram raids, bro. We still got our kids which are in cars, which are smashing into dairies and shops, and they're doing some real harm. And I'm worried about that. And so the kaupapa that you've talked about, I am 1,000% behind. But how do we bring that to our disaffected communities?
So two things. First off, if you've got a flood in your laundry, you've got two jobs. You've got to find the leak and turn it off, and you've got to mop. You've got to do both. If you don't turn the tap off, you're mopping a long time, right? Almost without exception, what we see coming out of governments in terms of their public policy initiatives, police and everybody else, mopping, bro, mopping. And they're discovering you can't mop enough. There aren't enough moppers and there aren't enough mops. That's the truth, right? But it's difficult when you're see, what we're talking about at its heart is change, people changing. It's hard. How did that last diet go? How did that last, stopping smoking go? That last gym goal go? Change is hard and it takes time. And so people who get hired and fired every 3 years, they're not incentivized to think like that, right? This is a problem. This is another example of the flaws in our current machinery of government. It's most egregious when the decisions they have to make last 150 years, like our infrastructure, right? That's why we've got unbelievable deficit on our social and physical infrastructure, because how does it even make sense to ask someone that gets hired and fired every 3 years to make a decision that'll last 100? Anyway, I'm digressing. So what was the question about?
How do we bring much of the kaupapa that you're talking about to our disaffected communities?
I got it. So mopping and turning the water off. So you've got to mop though, right? So you've got to intervene with the mess that's been created, because nobody wants to live in a mess. Okay. And we want all number of interventions that's about trying to mitigate, control, improve, but we've got to be clear. It's just mopping. We've got to have very clear-eyed line of sight on the interventions that are needed, the investment and the co-investment that's needed in order to get to the root causes and turn them off. And they're multifactorial, bro. They're multifactorial. The holistic nature of the human condition means that not only and I'm talking now about our community that have been intergenerationally marginalized and impoverished, not only physiologically and materially and economically, but culturally, socially, right? When you've got intergenerational burdens like that, well, you ain't turning that off in a hurry, right? Not in a hurry. And because it's multifactorial, because there's a lot of dimensions, your response has got to be similarly comprehensive and multifactorial, right? There's not enough time in here to be talking through all of it, but let me give you a summary view about how Ngāti Toa thinks about it and what we're doing. The first and most important principle, in my view, is to recognize that the power is within us, and that journey is undertaken one person at a time, right? One little boy at a time, one little girl at a time, one pakeke or adult at a time, right? And it begins with a vision. It begins with a new idea in their head about what's possible, about how to live, about who they are, right? A very great man who died in, I think, about 48, 49, the Mahatma Gandhi, said, be the change you want to see. So for Ngāti Toa, our approach has been, right, we have a vision. Our vision is we want to do everything in our power to enhance the well-being and prosperity and the mana of our people, but also all the manuhiri or the visitors that live in our tribal boundaries, particularly the most needy. So that's an inclusive vision. That's an inspiring vision. That's a vision that you can give yourself to. Okay. And then in terms of its execution, how are we going about that? Well, we're starting with ourselves. We're rowing our own waka. We're investing directly, not asking permission. We're putting our intergenerational equity into standing up our own social enterprises of education and health and housing, etc. Now, interesting, what's happened is we have focused on ourselves and being the change we want to see. Oh, now people want to talk to us. You know, we're not just standing there whinging and putting our hand out. We're taking care of our business. And so as a consequence, there are opportunities that emerge. This is the law of the harvest, bro, another eternal principle of human effectiveness. You sow good things, it comes back at you. And so we're monarching our people. And guess what? They're monarching us back. And the Crown, you know, we already paid our taxes. So we, you know, and we're delivering the health and the housing, etc. Well, yeah. So they're now in on that reciprocal journey of supporting each other. And it is literally just what's happened in the last 3.5 years has just been a vortex of reciprocal, ever greater good stuff going on. Now, coming back to turning off the water. So for my relations and the young ones and all, you know, now, when people talk about being Māori and Korero, when they talk about Ngāti Toa and Korero, that's a, you know, they're standing up straighter. When they're thinking about education and opportunities, well, now that's a realistic prospect because we're doing that. Oh, that's exciting. Yeah. So you just one person at a time, right? One person at a time, but vision, holistic, multifactorial. That's what we're about, bro. That's what we're about. We're accumulating evidence of how the exertion of our mana motuhake or our self-determination, we're accumulating evidence of how our community-led approach, our rangatiratanga or our chieftainship of our people, we can row our own waka, we can make a difference, and it's just a positive spiral that over time will produce the fruits that we're after. That's the answer, bro. One person at a time, one family at a time, one iwi at a time, one country at a time. And Aotearoa's best placed, bar none, in the whole world to ask and answer all these questions, to accumulate evidence of how this thing we call pluralistic democracy can be done better. And I'm grateful I was born here, bro. Kia ora for that.
Oh, tēnā koe, bro. Kanui te mi kia koutou, tēnā koe. Thank you so much for what you've just said. You know, bro, I think from here, I just want to say one thing to you, and it's just a mihi to you in the first place. It's to say to you that it's refreshing to see someone with your passion for your people and our people. And like you were saying, it starts with one person, and this concept of, I love the concept of emotion to emotion and doing the things which are natural to us, which is inherently to be good to each other. And I think we rationalize too much. But bro, when I get down there, I need to say properly thank you to you with proper kai. And at this stage, bro, I just want to say thank you on behalf of all those who are listening. And at this stage, I'm just going to say kia ora, and we're looking forward to catching up at some point. So to the listening audience, I just want to say tēnā koe to our rangatiri here, Helmut, and just acknowledge him and a big mihi to him. So kia ora, bro.